Good evening and welcome to 3GNY Stories Live, WEDU Wednesday. My name is Leora Klein and I'm a founding member of 3GNY and a grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. I'm honored to be here for our 11th WEDU Wednesday featuring guest speaker Anna Scheumann Gallegos, who has a fascinating story to share. 3GNY is an educational non-for-profit for grandchildren of survivors and our supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for descendants of survivors. Founded in 2005 with a group of 6, 3GNY's membership has grown to over 3,500 people. These past 15 years, we've held diverse in-person programs in New York, and we've been instrumental in helping 3G DC and 3GNJ start their own groups, and we continue to help groups around the country in starting their own 3G program. Our WEDU Wednesday showcases 3GNY's flagship educational initiative, WEDU, which stands for We Educate. This initiative empowers grandchildren of survivors to learn and compellingly share their families' Holocaust experiences in school classrooms and with community groups. We have all seen the heartbreaking studies stating that lack of Holocaust education amongst high school and college students who've recently graduated. The good news is that students who do receive Holocaust education are more comfortable and tolerant with people of different races and backgrounds, and they are also more willing to challenge incorrect and biased information and more likely to be upstanders. This is why WEDU is so critical today. It is a 4-week training program to teach grandchildren of survivors to learn and share their family testimony in school classrooms. We help you every step of the way to get comfortable with your family history. 3GNY has trained over 250 speakers in New York, New Jersey, Washington, DC, and now, because of the pandemic, over Zoom throughout the country. Through our grandparents' testimony, we talk about the importance of speaking up early and often where small injustices are found, on the playground, in the classroom, and on the street. Small steps prevent larger atrocities. We've reached over 25,000 young minds, and we know we need to do more. Our speakers have received over 1,000 thank you notes from students and teachers alike. Hope is not lost, but we must continue to do our very important work. You can help us accomplish this through a financial gift of any amount. This will go directly toward training more speakers, thus reaching even more students. We do not solicit donations from schools, teachers, or students. We provide our programming to schools completely free, and we aim to keep the cost of training to 3Gs as low as possible. There is a link in the chat for people to donate, and we hope you will consider making this most meaningful gift today. If you've already donated to us, we thank you so much. Thank you for helping us honor the memories of our grandparents, and thank you for helping future citizens of the world combat intolerance near and far. I would now like to introduce you to Michelle Bernstein, former 3GNY board member, who will share a few words and introduce Anna.
Thank you, Leora. Good evening. My name is Michelle Bernstein, and I am a proud graduate of WEDU. My maternal grandparents, Eva and Herbert Glazer, are Holocaust survivors from Prague, Czechoslovakia. My grandmother, a survivor of Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, and Theresienstadt, used to say that children, and subsequently her grandchildren, were her best revenge. It is my duty, my desire to pass on the story of their survival and to continue their legacy. And WEDU is one of the many ways in which I can successfully do so. WEDU allowed me the opportunity to formulate my individual 3D story and then bring this story to light in neighboring schools. I am grateful for the experience, as this program, this type of education, is more important now than ever. We're all excited to hear Anna's story, a barber from Krakow. Anna was born and raised in New York. Her maternal grandparents, Max and Erna Hilfstein, and maternal great-grandmother, Anna Kluger, were Holocaust survivors. Anna serves on the board of directors of the New Krakow Friendship Society, a nonprofit international organization established in 1965 for survivors and subsequent generations with Holocaust ancestral roots from Krakow, Poland, and the pre-war Polish Galicia regions. She became involved in the 3GNY WEDU program in late 2017 and considers it a great honor to share her family's story. Following in the footsteps of her grandfather, who was a beautician, Anna became a makeup artist and stylist. Anna lives in the suburbs of New York City with her husband, Aiden, and their son, Max. Anna, take it away.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So I like to start with a photo of me and my Papa Max as I remember him. This is from the summer of 1998. I'm 15 years old here, and Papa was 78. And I remember him as just the most kind and loving and warm person. So I'm going to tell you about his story. He was born on January 8th in 1920, and when he talked about his childhood, he would say, "We didn't want from anything." Here's a picture. The next picture is with my Papa Max, with his younger brother David and his father Leon. They lived in a nice apartment outside of the Jewish section in Krakow, Poland, which is a large metropolitan city. They were observant Jews, but not very religious, not Orthodox. Now, my great-grandfather, Papa's father, died when he was 37 years old, when my Papa was 14 in 1934. And when he would talk about him, he would say that he was the lucky one because he didn't have to see what happened next. After his father died, Papa dropped out of school and got ready to take over the family business. And here is the family business: Salon Fryzjerski dla Pan Panov, hair salon of Panov Street. The man in the middle is my great-grandfather, and he's there with two of his barbers. So the Hilfsteins were all beauticians, and Papa was a natural. He got skipped ahead in cosmetology school twice, and by 17, he was running the family salon. And here is a photo of Papa giving a man a shave. So the salon was located a couple blocks outside of the Jewish quarter of Krakow, and the clientele were both Jew and non-Jew alike. And as was the culture of the times, men would come in to get shaved a couple times a week, and women would come in to get their hair washed and set once a week. So in 1936, when Papa's 16 years old, his mother walks into the salon with a young girl. She looked actually a good bit younger than she was. And he said, "Would you like to have this girl for your sister?" So it had turned out that Papa's father, before he died, told his mother, "You know, you should have a daughter. So when I'm gone, go to the local orphanage and adopt a girl." So that's what she did. And just like that, he had a little sister, Helen. Meanwhile, he's a young man. He likes to play soccer and go out on dates. He likes to take dates dancing on the weekend. And he would go take his mother out to nice dinners on the weekend as well. And he was a boxer. And he trained to be a boxer because he didn't take any anti-Semitism from anybody. He would say, if anyone started anything, I knock him first. And there was active anti-Semitism for as long as he could remember. The Holocaust didn't start with concentration camps and gas chambers. It started with small things: propaganda, graffiti, being yelled at on the street, Jews getting beat up. And he saw a steady rise in anti-Semitism throughout his childhood and early adulthood. And when he talked about the older generation, he said they were runners, not fighters. They would say, be passive, be quiet, keep your head down, don't make too much noise. We've seen this all before, and this will pass. And when he would talk about the younger generation, he would say that, you know, they were too young and they didn't have a chance to grow up and stand fast. So he really felt like it was up to him to do something. So on Friday nights after Shabbat services were let out of the local Orthodox temple and hundreds of people would flood the streets, And one such Friday night, an Orthodox man runs into the salon and says, "Max, we need you. They're attacking Jews." An anti-Semitic group that was active in the area started attacking people. So he puts down his scissors, puts on his boxing gloves because he has to protect his hands because they're his livelihood, and he runs out to the street, and he said he knocked a few. Now, it was Papa and two of his friends who would do this. The elders of the community would call them hooligans. But he said, when they need us, they call us, and we would be there. Now, despite all of this, he would say that life was still good. At 18, he joined in efforts with the Jewish Gemina, the Jewish community heads at the time, to help families, Jewish families that were escaping Germany. So for a long time, and it had been very dangerous, even deadly already at this point for Jews in Germany, and a lot were trying to leave. So he helped place these families into new homes, and he even brought one such family home with him. He also joined the Red Cross and learned first aid. So at this point, a little while after, Germany has invaded, and there are rumors that they are coming for Jews first. So Papa decides he's going to start walking with many others. And he's walking along with whatever he can carry on his back. And Germany would send planes flying really low and shoot people trying to escape. So he had no choice but to turn around and go back home. When he returned home, he saw enemies that had been hidden. People he had known his whole life were suddenly in the Gestapo. As of December 1st, 1939, armbands were mandatory, and the salon had to be labeled as Jewish. He was assigned to forced labor, cleaning the streets and cutting bricks at night. And on March 3rd in 1941, his family was ordered to move into the ghetto. You were just given a date, and you could take whatever you can carry, and they had to report to their new apartment. Now, in the ghetto, food was already scarce by this point, and the family's former housekeeper and one of its barbers from the salon would watch the fence of the ghetto and would sneak food, if they could, to him. And he said that this was life, a potato or a piece of bread or a piece of salami would be the difference between making it another day and not. And he had to work in the ghetto. And of course, his first job was at the salon. So it turned out that the way that the ghetto was set up, that his was the only salon in the ghetto, and he was ordered to keep it open. And the Nazi soldiers, which he called future tormentors, would come to get cuts and manicures, their wives styled, and they wouldn't have to pay. He said they could do whatever they wanted, and other patrons would have to leave if they were in there. Now, the second job he had was volunteering at a pandemic hospital that was set up. So typhus was running rampant in the ghetto. And of course, you have a lot of people in very close quarters. And one of the ways that it spreads is through lice. So his job was to shave their heads of everyone that was admitted into this typhus hospital to help slow the spread. And this had a bit of a benefit to him because he would get hassled a lot less walking around the street because the soldiers and the police would think he might be diseased. He saw a lot of violence in the ghetto. If you did or said anything, you disappeared or were shot on the spot. He witnessed beatings and shootings, and he once saw an Orthodox man getting the beard ripped out of his face. One day, the head of the Gestapo, who had always been relatively nice to him, called him out of the shop and beat him in front of everyone on the street. He never knew why, and there wasn't always a why. Sometimes it was just for fun. He had to count out 25 lashes with a whip, which was leather filled with lead balls. After his beating, he was forbidden to go back to the salon for a time and was assigned hard labor. So the third job that he had was to carry cabinets and wardrobes out of apartment buildings and out of the ghetto. So these are apartments that were formerly Jewish homes. So he's doing this job, and a woman calls to him one day, "Max, I need your help." So he goes to this woman's house, and she's hidden a woman and her children. And this woman has been beaten, whipped very badly. Her back is completely torn open. He said you could see her spine and her lung tissue, and it started to get gangrenous. So he gets some of his first aid supplies, which isn't much, and he tries to cut out all of the decaying tissue and save her. He goes back a couple times and tries to do this, but he realizes he can only do so much and she needs more help than that. So he decides he's going to sneak her out. Now she's not alone. She's with 3 children too. So what he did was he puts her in a wardrobe and her children in a wardrobe, and he drugged them so that they wouldn't make any noise. And he proceeds to carry them on a dolly out of the ghetto. Now, one of the SS kind of suspected he was up to something, and he calls him out, like, I'm gonna tell what you're doing, and they're gonna kill you, so knock it off. And he said, if you tell on me, I'm gonna name you as my co-conspirator, and we both die. So the man keeps his mouth shut, and my grandfather successfully gets these people out of the ghetto. He sort of felt that if he had the ability to do something, he had to, because if he died, it was in God's hands. And this was an attitude that he kept throughout the war and throughout the rest of his life. One day, his sister was taken away in a transport, and another day, his brother just didn't return home. So this was his mother, Anna. She was taken in a transport and not seen again. And this picture of her, which is quite small, just a couple inches, he described as his most prized possession. He kept it with him throughout the whole war, in his shoe, in his mouth. And he described her as the most beautiful, most wonderful, most kind woman he ever knew. He was told when she was taken away that she'd be taken care of and she was sent to work elsewhere, and he had to stay where he was. And that was the last time that he saw her. So the 4th job that he had when in the ghetto, after his mother was taken away, was to sort clothes. Big mounds of clothing, and he was with about 20 people, and they just had to sort through this clothing and put it in different piles. And one day he's sorting clothing, and he picks up a jacket that he recognizes as his brother's jacket, and he sees a bullet hole through the back with blood, and that's how he knew that his brother was dead. Meanwhile, all this is going on, and on November 15th, 1942, he married my grandmother, Erna, my babunia. They've been engaged for a while and were waiting for a better time. But after transports started taking people en masse out of the ghetto, they decided, why wait? And they said this many times when I was growing up. They said, if we're gonna die, we wanted to die married. And so they were. My grandmother was 18 and my grandfather was 22. Not long after that, Papa was arrested by the Gestapo for making false papers, permits to leave the ghetto, and he played completely dumb, even though the allegations were true. He said, I'm working in the shop, I'm in the hospital, I'm sorting goods. When would I possibly have time to do any of these other activities? And for whatever reason, they believed him and let him go. He was in the last transport leaving the ghetto with Babunia. And on March 13th, 1943, the remainder of the Krakow ghetto was liquidated. And those that weren't killed on the spot were sent to concentration camps. He was sent to Płaszów, which is in the southern suburb of Krakow. This was Papa's armband. Once you were sent to a camp, you were no longer a name, you were a number. And this was his number, 47451. The triangle with the P signifies a political prisoner. It originally also had a Star of David, which he ripped off, and I'll get to that why later. So Płaszów was considered a work camp, even though there were murders daily. It had your typical standard concentration camp protocols, roll calls, lining up, standing up for hours, made to exercise, do meaningless labor. And he was brought back to the ghetto every day with Babunia initially to clean and sort until all evidence of the ghetto was completely gone. Occasionally he was taken off of work detail and beaten, and they were random beatings daily. One so badly that he thought he was going to die, and he could barely move. So his cousin broke into where he was being kept and took him to work where he was working as a furrier. After he was there a little while, one of the head officers recognized him from the ghetto and took him to be his personal barber. And this included Gut, which was called the Butcher of Płaszów. He was known to be one of the most brutal SS, and he headed the Płaszów concentration camp. He was actually so brutal that he ended up getting removed from his position and arrested by the SS because he was taking a certain amount of the rations that were supposed to go to the prisoners and selling them on the black market. So imagine trying to shave this man and those like him with a straight razor. If he bleeds, you die. And he ended up styling the hair for all the SS officers and their wives, and that would include also the female SS officers. Now, it wasn't uncommon for officers to have attack dogs, and at Płaszów, Gut had two such dogs, Herr Ralph and Herr Rolf. And when you passed these dogs, you had to bow and greet them by name. So every morning when my grandparents passed them, they would have to bow and say, Guten Morgen, Herr Rolf. Guten Morgen, Herr Rolf. And if you didn't, they were commanded to maul you. And this was something that both of my grandparents mentioned quite often, and it was particularly traumatic for my grandmother. So over time, the 25 approximately 1,000 prisoners at Płaszów is down to about 750. And just like the Krakow ghetto, Papa was tasked to dismantle it. He had to dismantle barracks and get rid of any sign. The goal here, of course, is not just to kill Jews, but to erase any trace of a people considered to be Untermensch, subhuman, had ever existed, to rewrite history. People had previously been burned alive or shot into mass graves, and one of the last jobs he was given at Płaszów was to dig up their decaying bodies and carry them in a wheelbarrow to be burned. So the Russian army is advancing at this point, and it's time for the death march to Auschwitz. So on January 17th, 1945, he has to walk over 50 miles in Polish winter in below zero temperatures. The length, it's about the length of Manhattan 4 times over through the countryside, wearing nothing more than cotton pajamas, essentially. Maybe you have a coat, maybe you didn't. And if you fell, you were shot. Babunia, who my papa described as 80 pounds soaking wet, fell. So Papa carried her, and when he couldn't anymore, his cousin Marcus carried her until she was able to regain her strength. They arrive at Auschwitz, and they are separated. And this is when Papa loses track of Babunia. Turns out she was actually only there for a few days before she was sent to Bergen-Belsen, another death camp. He's at Auschwitz for a short while until he has to walk to the next camp, Gleiwitz. A couple weeks later, he is transported in a cattle car. And when he would talk about the cattle car experience, this isn't transportation meant for humans. He said that you were crammed in so tightly that you didn't know who had died until you arrived at the next location, and the living would walk out and the dead would drop to the floor. He arrives at Sachsenhausen, where he manages to avoid getting tattooed. Basically, every time he got towards the front of the line, he would sneak towards the back. He just made the decision that he wasn't going to allow that to happen to him. Shortly after that, he's transported, this time in an open cattle car. People are freezing to death, and he said that they had their hands out trying to catch snowflakes so they could get a little bit of water. So he arrives at the next camp at Flossenburg, where he recalled that at mealtime, which was soup and a little bit of bread, that sometimes the SS would have fun by pouring the soup over your hands. And if you managed to hold on to your bowl as you got burned, you got to eat. And if you dropped it, you didn't. Sometimes you would also see them urinate in the soup and laugh as the prisoners still had to eat. A couple weeks later, it was time for another cattle car, and this time to Offenburg. And he continued on like that from camp to camp, basically staying ahead of the advancing Russian army until France bombarded the train track ahead of them and they were stuck. He overheard the SS talking of Bodensee, which was a local lake, and he figured that they meant to just drown anyone that was left. So he got together with his cousin Dolek, Dave, and a bunch of other people, about 12 other people, and they decided they would try to escape. So they basically decided that if they scatter at night and run into the woods and in different directions, that they couldn't all get caught, and that was their best chance. So that's what they did. And Papa said that he liberated himself. Him and Dolek found a farmhouse, but they told they weren't welcome and that authorities would be called on them if they stayed. So they hid in the woods. Dolek broke into a farmhouse and stole a potato, which kept them fed for a couple of days. And then they started hearing bullets in the distance, which they later learned was the French army. A couple days after that, he sees a French soldier sitting on top of a tank yelling "Liberté." And that's how he knew that the war was over. Now, I wish I could tell you that that was the end of the suffering, but liberation was not the end. People ate themselves to death. These walking skeletons, as he called them, had not seen real food in years, and their bodies couldn't handle it. And he saw people eating whatever they could get their hands on, stuffing their bellies full and dropping dead. So he would have one bite every so often until he gained his strength back. Now, those that survived had nothing. My grandfather went back to his home, but there was another family there. His whole life had been taken. And the violence wasn't over either. Many Jews were killed in pogroms after because the Poles blamed them for the war. So his armband didn't have the Star of David on it anymore because he didn't, when he was walking around Poland, didn't want to be identified as a Jew. He thought it would increase his chance of survival. So he burned the star. And he also burned the rest of his uniform because he said he couldn't get rid of the smell and the lice. He was directed by the UN to go to Konstanz, Germany. And this is the ID that he was given, which gave him back his identity. It gave him back his name. He was assigned by the UN to live in a hotel. And then he tried to connect with people and ask around if anyone knew anything about who might have survived. Before the Holocaust, Poland had the largest population of Jews in Europe. 90% of them were killed. He managed to track down Babunia, and he got permission to get her. So this is a letter in French and English. It says, "We ask the French, American, and English officers to be kindly requested to help as much as possible Mr. Hilfstein Max, who is political prisoner in several German concentration camps, and who is now trying to visit his wife in the DP camp of Bergen-Belsen." So Babunia was in the displaced persons camp in Bergen-Belsen, and you'd think he was free, but he wasn't. He had to get permission to go and get her. And so that's what he did. And here is Papa and Babunia a little while later, back together. And he said they started out their lives together as two strange people. There was a local town, Gallingen, that was turned into a DP camp, and they were assigned an apartment and later a car. And Papa was elected the representative for the Jewish community to the French government. There was a time where he wanted to go to present-day Israel, but he was not allowed to leave by the French. They wanted him to stay and continue his position there. Babunia got pregnant, and this is the letter that gives Papa permission to take her to the hospital in Konstanz to give birth. So this is Papa with my Uncle Leon. He's about a year old. They're still living in the apartment in the DP camp. Now, there are work programs at the DP camp, and he was able to get recertified. So this on the wall right behind me it says Meisterbrief. And so that was him getting recertified so he could practice being a beautician again. On December 1949, they were sponsored by an American uncle and came to New York by way of Boston. He settled in the Bronx. He got a job at a salon. And in 1954, he opened a salon on West 4th Street in Manhattan on the same day that my mother, Simone, was born. In 1958, they bought a house in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx in what he described as not the ghetto. Now, what he meant by this was it wasn't a Jewish neighborhood. He didn't want to self-segregate himself from the rest of the world. He thought it was very important that he live with people that were different than him, and that he would show other people that a Jew just wants what everyone else wants. And so with my mother, Simone, 4 years old, he goes door to door and introduces himself. My name is Max Hilfstein. I am a Jew. I live over there. He wanted to know right away if anybody was going to have any problem with him, and no one did. In fact, he made such good friends that their families we call cousins today. He founded, with 12 other men, the New Krakow Friendship Society in 1965. Basically, the idea was to create a community, to recreate family for people that had lost so much, and be surrounded with those that could really relate to you and your experience. And they would have big social events, and also to put some good back into the world. In the late 70s, he started going into schools after realizing that if he didn't start telling his story, that it would be too late. And he went back on what he called pilgrimage to Krakow often. He said, so as never to forget and have inscribed what had happened. He said, my children knew from when they were very little. Some believe children should not be told, it's too terrible. Very young children died, so let new children know what happened. He took that attitude with his grandchildren too. The story of his life was a regular part of my childhood and teen years until he passed away. And he had a happy life with my babunia. On their 50th wedding anniversary, since they'd never had a real wedding, the family threw them a wedding for their 50th. On November 13th, 1998, he passed away, and the family buried him on their 56th wedding anniversary. In one of his interviews, Papa was asked, what do you want to tell future generations? What do you want to tell young people now? And so here's his message to you. Be aware what's going on around you. Don't take any insult from nobody. Stand up for your rights. Don't be passive, because passive brought tragedy. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow. Thank you, Anna. You have inscribed in all of our listeners' minds here tonight your Papa's story, and we are really, really very grateful. We'd like to open the floor for questions. I have a few coming in already. So I will ask the first one, and then Michelle will ask the second. People want to know what happened to the woman and the children that were taken out in the wardrobe from the Krakow ghetto, the woman with the gangrene in her back.
So he had been communicating with the underground. So he did what he was supposed to do, which was bring these pieces of furniture out and put them in like a warehouse where they were collecting all this. And he doesn't know what happened after that, but he had been in connection with the underground. So he's assuming that they were picked up and taken care of, but he's not entirely, he was never sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. What a story. I was wondering, did you ever go back to Poland? And if so, what was your experience like?
Yeah, I did. After Papa passed away, I went with my grandmother, with Babunia. When I was 18 years old, and she took me all around Krakow. I saw where they were born, where they lived, visited all sorts of historical sites. I went back to camps, and I did go to Auschwitz as well, although she did not accompany me there because she said she would never stand on that ground again.
Anna, you said that you grew up with this story that all of the children in your family did. How did you get to a point, though, that you're able to articulate yourself so well and create such a clear timeline to share with others?
That's a good question. I mean, it's really a credit to you guys and the WEDU program, because I had all these sort of bits and pieces. And he did have a video, an extensively long video that was recorded, but it's not always very linear, his storytelling. So basically it just was a matter of sitting down and just piecing it together in the correct order, and the very difficult tasks of figuring out what to leave in and what to cut out, because I mean, I speak for half an hour, but I'm encompassing his entire life. So it's just like a sliver. So, and then really just practicing so I don't get too emotional or I don't run off on a tangent.
You do great. You do really, really great.
Agreed. I have a comment here that I think rings true. It says, riveting story by a powerful storyteller. Great stuff. Liberation was not the end of the suffering. That is the phrase that nails it.
Thank you.
There's a specific question here asking if your grandmother was liberated from Auschwitz, or was she on the death march? And this is from a woman named Adele Black, whose father was also a survivor and also went to the Krakow Society functions with his friends.
So my grandmother went from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, and that's where she was liberated from. And then they had set up a nearby displaced persons camp there. I focus on my grandfather's story because it's a little too much, I feel, to put both in. And my cousin David went through the WEDU program as well, and he tells my grandmother's story.
Oh.
So the whole idea is that we could actually be in a classroom together and both speak. And yes, there is a little overlap, but you could also see the contrast between, you know, two different stories or in two individuals and how they cope with everything.
Have you had the opportunity to be together in a class thus far?
Not yet, no.
Okay, I'm on it.
Soon. Okay.
Yes.
There's a question here that says, how did your grandfather find your grandmother? Also, any details on your grandfather's adopted sister?
Well, I'm unclear. I can't remember exactly how he located her, but I know that there were like ledgers and books, and people would just ask around if you knew where somebody ended up or you heard about things. So I can't recall exactly how he found out that she was at Bergen-Belsen to go and get her. And as far as his sister Helen goes, he never saw her again. So he didn't, I mean, he assumed she was taken on a transport, and that's it.
There's many thank yous coming in for your ability to tell this horror in a way that we could hear it. I noticed that you mentioned that your great-grandfather's name was Leon, and then your uncle was Leon, and then your grandfather was Max, and your son is Max. Mm-hmm. There's such power in those names, and they carry with them such enormous stories. And you should feel very proud, because you are really carrying this enormous legacy, and not just holding it for yourself, but you are acting on it. So it's really incredible. How many classes have you spoken to thus far with WEDU?
Somewhere between 12 to 15. And I did a Zoom classroom as well after everything locked down with the pandemic.
How was that? Was that hard?
Just a little adjustment, a little practice with the PowerPoint presentation, that's all. But it was good. It's really great to engage with students and see their little faces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any engagement is nice these days. I have a comment and question that says, Thank you, Anna. What a heroic man your papa was. My question is, did he always have a positive attitude after the war?
I mean, I can't speak for right after, but generally speaking, yeah, he had told me on more than one occasion that you have to give everybody a chance, that you shouldn't judge somebody, you know, that first impression, that snap judgment, that you shouldn't do that because you don't really know what people have been through. Nobody would see this, you know, man with his, you know, soft face, you know, soft round face and think, oh, well, he's seen horrors that few have seen, you know, so to give people a chance.
There's a question here that I'm going to also try and help answer, which is, do you find it easier for 3Gs to tell the story or 2Gs? And I'm open to you, Michelle and Anna, weighing in. We find as 3Gs that the one generation removed actually allows us to tell these stories a little bit more readily, because a lot of the survivors who became parents quickly after the war just so badly wanted to protect their children from what they endured. Now, I'm speaking specifically about a certain type of survivor that didn't talk. Your grandfather, Anna, was a talker. My grandparents, all four, did not speak. They did not talk about the war. And I think that with that is a very big burden and responsibility for the second generation, our parents' generation, who had to really manage knowing something happened to their families, whether or not they knew the details or not, but they really had to just survive in their own way a normal life. And I don't use the word survive unintentionally, and I don't mean to conflate any experience here. With regards to the third generation, as grandchildren of survivors, we grew up to often with these adoring figures that took on superhero status because they survived this atrocity. And there's a space there for us to tell these stories that sometimes is easier than our parents' generation talking about the horror of what happened to their own parents. Not that it's not horrible for us to talk about what happened to our grandparents, but we have a little more distance that makes us more willing or more able to tell these very painful stories. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I mean, I think it also just depends so much on the person. I mean, my mother is a Holocaust educator. You know, she's a good public speaker and she's a retired teacher. So I think it just, I think it depends a lot on the personality too. And yeah, being able to, with a 3G, it's probably much easier to tell a story because you're slightly more removed from it. You didn't have to live with the very intense, you know, growing up with that trauma around you. And my mother grew up with 3 survivors because my great grandmother, Anna, survived also.
Oh, she did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wish I would have let you answer the question first and not me.
Another question's come in. Beautiful story, Anna. When did you know you wanted to follow in your grandfather's footsteps professionally? What an incredible tribute to him.
Well, what's funny is that it wasn't an on purpose thing. I started out doing something completely different and I just really enjoyed kind of doing this on the side. I was working for a publishing company in 2008 when everything tanked and I was laid off. I was like, maybe I can turn my hobby into a career. So it just sort of happened. And then it wasn't until a few years after that that somebody even pointed out to me that I was kind of following him, that it dawned on me.
Amazing. Amazing. I think we have time for just one more question. And how did your grandfather spend his leisure time after the war?
with, I mean, with family, with the New Krakow Friendship Society. I mean, he was also the president of his shul, the Pelham Bay Jewish Center, for 21 years. So I think he just always enjoyed being around people, and the way his personality was, he was very soft spoken, and he would really take his time when he was speaking to you. And people just wanted to be around him. So he was a very social guy.
He sounds like a force, a true force. Michelle, did you want to include any other question?
I think that's all. Thank you so much, Anna, for your time. I mean, I was so captivated by this, as were so many other people, and it's just so important for us to continue on and keep telling and sharing these stories. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for being part of our program, for speaking with us tonight. Thank you to all of the viewers who have called in or Zoomed in from all over. We're glad you took time to hear Anna's family story. And if you haven't yet had a chance to make a gift in support of our work, we would really appreciate you doing so. Also, if you have connections to educators who would welcome us into their classroom, we encourage you to reach out to us. There will be contact information in the chat. We hope to see you again. We have the next WEDU Wednesday will be in January of the new year, but this coming Monday, December 14th, we have a 3G fireside chat around the menorah with Stephanie Butnick of Tablet Magazine and her Unorthodox podcast, along with Shai DeLuca, the celebrity designer. So we hope you join us there. We'll be sending an email tomorrow with registration links for these events. And there will also be a recording of tonight. And we encourage you to check out 3GNY's YouTube channel, which has our previous WEDU Wednesdays, because it is very important to get these stories out, to share them with as many people as possible, so that they're not just our own, but they are for all. Whether you're celebrating Hanukkah tomorrow or any other holiday, we wish you a very safe, healthy, and happy holiday season, and let us all meet together in person in 2021. Anna, with all of me, I thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good night.
Good night.